Thanks everyone for taking the time to listen to this panel. We are going to be talking today about quantum cyber readiness, and I'm very happy to have an esteemed panel here. We have John Buselli from IBM. We have Rishu Chanakishawa. Close? No, sorry. Lucas Enlow from SandboxAQ. And sorry, Rishu is with Palo Alto Networks. And then we have Blair Canavan from Thales. So a very good panel to talk about this topic. And there's a number of areas to dig in on. I wanted to maybe just say initially, I think most of you are probably familiar with what quantum cyber readiness is. There's a point in the future at which there may exist what they call a crypto-analytically relevant quantum computer. Hopefully that's the last time I need to say that today. And at that point, the world needs to be prepared to have upgraded or taken the steps to upgrade cryptography, asymmetric cryptography specifically. Start with, we're really taking a tools focus here today. All four of the companies have the ability to look at what's going on inside the network and understand what cryptography is in use. I want to just get some general thoughts about the benefits of doing an inventory of what cryptography is being used today. Maybe we'll start with you, Rishi, to talk about that.
Absolutely. I think the very first one you're looking at when you're thinking through cryptography is everything that's in use in your infrastructure, besides also what's in support. Today, there is no cryptographic hygiene or any cryptographic process in place to separate between libraries that are being embedded into code that's still shipping, libraries that still have deprecated ciphers that are now going into support actively as we speak. There is no tool in place to actually alert and highlight these practices. So that's the first issue. The second issue that we see is, of course, you need both ends of the session establishment, the source and the dest, to be able to support these newer ciphers, negotiate something more stronger, something more standard as we speak. But again, if one of these endpoints don't support it, it gets downgraded to a weaker cipher of choice. So not being aware of what's in support across these two endpoints is another big pain point or loophole that's also an issue. And then the lack of awareness of how cryptography plays a very big role in the fundamental foundational security pillars today is another big issue that we see in the industry. So getting acquainted, getting this process in place, and actually getting a consistent, comprehensive tool to bring that visibility, and then bring in alerting across what's deprecated, what's weakened, what's to be adopted as the next standard is probably the top issue that we see today.
Yep. Anybody else want to add to that?
I think I would focus, I think one thing that particularly stands out for us as we tackle discovery is how incredibly siloed cryptography is handled and managed today. It's been baked into so many other processes that your organization does that it's really easy to take it for granted. And your current understanding of how your organization uses cryptography, a lot of times it boils down to how your org chart is. And so finding tools that are able to find cryptography across not just the different dimensions of your IT infrastructure, but your org chart and get it all into one single place. I think that kind of de-siloing and a real centralized view of cryptography is the most important starting point from our perspective.
I'd certainly like to build on that. I think one has to define what an inventory means, because an inventory is not consistent across enterprises or across providers. So, you have to recognize from an enterprise level, for example, that there's things that you control and you manage that are discoverable. And there's a whole array of infrastructure that you acquire from third parties, only partially of which is ever going to be discoverable. So when you think about an inventory, you really have to understand what can I discover and what ultimately is the community responsible to provide to me, so I can assess the impact of change overall. I think that's a really important point, certainly something we've learned.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. It's almost sort of the inverse of shared responsibility during discovery and then shared responsibility through remediation, right? And both can be troubled paths to go down, which is why it's important, I think, Rishi, you were saying, more of a holistic view. And all of that needs to tie together to the anchors of trust, right? I think that's the big part. People talk a lot about data confidentiality, but I think, in fact, the most evident impact of this will likely be around transactional integrity, lack thereof. And so I know Thales has got a lot of hardware security modules and so on right at the root of trust. What's your perspective on that, Blair?
Well, there's so much to unpack here to all of our colleagues here. We probably all agree this is probably the single biggest undertaking, certainly for crypto, that we've seen in a generation. For those that have been around HSMs like me for 30 plus years, you know, they're, like you said, Lucas, it's a lot of this stuff is just sitting, doing its thing. No one really thought much about it. And quite frankly, why do you have to worry about it? It works. It's operational. It's still not broken, by the way. And I think that puts people at almost a false sense of security that we really have an operational environment. Some people say legacy, but I think that's a bit too early to say that. But what we're seeing is firsthand is that in order for you to take a pragmatic approach to PQC resilience, you got to start quantifying the number of undertakings that your organization is going to have to do on its own with the outside support, with your subject matter, because it's daunting. So for example, one of the largest organizations that we just spoke to said to us, specifically, they have 104 PQC projects. And then they got a little bit, they said that's 7 categories for areas that we have to do. And what's unfortunate about some of it is it could take 3, 4, 5, 6 years on one of those projects. So what they're really trying to do is rally behind what can they in reality do now, and what are they going to have to get the help with to cover off all of this. And I say nirvana, but this was really shocking to the people listening to this in our organizations under the illusion is all we have to do is swap out some algorithms, right? We're ready to go.
Right.
And I think Lucas nailed it. There's so much buried in so many places that this, unfortunately, is an undertaking that's not to be taken lightly, but there's an opportunity here. So while we're at it, to get ready for PQC resilience, we can fix a lot of the old that shouldn't have been there or shouldn't be there. And when you hear words like custom crypto, single DES, SHA-1, you all know what this means. That stuff should not be there. So I see a lot of hope. It's not all bad, but this is an opportunity for the first time for most organizations to do this, and they're all going to have to do it. Right? I think everybody knows I'm a big fan of crypto discovery. We've talked about this, so.
Yeah, I think it's important also to define what's the purpose of inventory, what's the purpose of discovering. So to define it, we've certainly come to recognize that, yes, there's physical discovery of cryptography, but it's rather unwieldy and in some cases unuseful unless it's thoroughly mapped to the dependencies of the organization.
You got it.
And on top of that, some semblance of an awareness as to the value of the business assets that sit over those dependencies. Because the reality of it is you're only going to remediate as quickly as your slowest dependency. And so that's going to change the landscape of how you approach this problem pragmatically. I think that's really what is in front of all of us, right? That intertwining of business and technical experience.
And I think that's the key, certainly, as we're seeing, is sort of elevation of the discussion beyond the bits and bytes of cryptography, right? And the different, and like trustedness that's taken care through the international competition, right? To come up with the algorithms that are the right ones. We've spent a lot of time now mapping for clients those cryptographic usage, the algorithms up through transport layers, up through communications and applications, right up to the business processes, as you said, John. Because when you think about it, this is a multi-year effort, right? It's oftentimes there are various stakeholders. It starts with the CISO, but the CIO and the CTO need to be involved as well. And there's this ambiguity over timeline that maybe we'll talk about a little bit, but so it's easy to sort of push it off. Right? And I think the key to it is trying to map it to the business processes, as you said, John. Any additional thoughts, I guess, around sort of the call to action and the timeline and the drivers for change? Because again, to your point, Blair, it's never a bad time to go look in the attic. You'll find stuff, right? But what else can we use to motivate clients to understand you should start doing this now?
I think so. To add to John and what Blair said, and to respond to that exact question, customers have never had the need to actually consider cryptography as a potential threat. It's been stable, reliable for 3-4 decades at this point. Of course, there's been deprecated crypto or cipher algorithms, but that's been part of library upgrades, which is taken care of by a DevSecOps or an applications engineer who has that process in place. But today, you're looking at a potential threat to cryptography itself, which is where this whole discussion stems from, which is existing cryptography, asymmetric cryptography to be specific, can be broken and will be broken. We just don't know the timeline. But it doesn't matter. What matters is CISOs, CIOs, and the board is taking notice, because if the foundational element is broken, then everything is in clear text, especially at the bad actors' hands. And that can lead to all the known kinds of attack vectors and maybe more sophisticated target attacks to businesses where intellectual property or PII data or anything else can be compromised. So early adopters that we see and the ones who are actually focused on this inventory process right now in 2025 are going to be the ones who have confidential data that has a longer shelf life, right? So to answer your specific question, Colin, we are looking at that quantum threat, the CRQC leading to the quantum threat, to be the biggest driver of even considering inventorying the brownfield deployment of cryptography across the entire global infrastructure. So that is the first issue. So to be able to even discover everything that's already in support and in use, and then put a new process in place for anything that needs to be secured in the next 2 to 3 years, because data that's in communication channels that are still using existing cryptography will be harvested and can be broken, can be abused. So that is the first order of execution, where boards are taking notice, and this push from the quantum threat is leading to an inventory being a minimum requirement to start addressing that.
I guess I've grown to see it a little differently in the sense, I mean, from a pragmatic point of view. I mean, we can have these discussions with our customers and they seem very rational. But in reality, the idea of cryptographic modernization projects only go so far in a corporation. I think the thing we've learned is they really need to be tied to the modernization effort of the enterprise in general, because that's where the investment in capital is. And you'll move along that path where capital is being invested for some beneficial effect to the business. Oh, and you'll remediate along the way when that door is open. So it's not quite a one-to-one correspondence we've seen. The other fact is security historically has always been managed to the minimum level of compliance. And there aren't clear definitions yet in industry that say what your path should be. I mean, there's rules like DORA in Europe that are beginning to highlight some of these instances. But, you know, other than the fact that NIST has put out a deprecation and a disallowing schedule, 2030 to 2035, this is still largely arbitrary and discretionary. And that's, I think, the challenge that we face as an industry. How do we provide clarity and maybe guidance to the regulatory bodies to make it more clear for the boardroom to make decisions? That's really one of the big challenges.
Yeah, and I think that's did you want to add to that, Blair?
Absolutely. I can add, I could just say, I agree to all this, because I think we're all in the same boat. Let's be realistic. I think that there's still this element of, I'll wait and see how bad this is going to be.
Yeah.
Or, to your point, a minimum, from a compliance point of view. And then there are those that are looking at this or speaking to this, and we're going to hear a lot from some of our friends later on today, Dr. Mosca and all those that have been doing this for over 20 years. What if tomorrow is the day? What if the week after next is the day? And he's not yelling at the windmill. He's not saying that this is doom and gloom and the sky is falling, but he's saying, I don't know if you've all caught the news, but there's things that have affected us right under our feet. So people, but immediately their response is, well, that's just another near miss. That's just another myth. That's just another. And then someone said, well, what if that's Dr. Mosca, what if that were the case, that these new methods with this type of quantum, compute power, were able to not take RSA or ECC out in 5 minutes, but What if it took 5 days or 5 months? I'd still take that if I was a nation state or a bad actor. So, sorry, back to what I was basically saying. I think that the element of this is lost on a lot of people who just are still arms crossed, quite skeptical, but I would say that skepticism is slowly dissipating to, at least we agree we got to get ready for this. And the question is, how much effort do we have, and how much resources do we have to start now so that we are ready for this? We talked about, when is quantum day? I don't know. Do you have a crystal ball? I don't. So what is quantum day? Is it when everybody now knows that there's a CRQC, or is it that we've had a few hacks, we've had a few, things like this happen? So all said and done, I don't think you can afford to sit around anymore. So whether it's a semblance of a discovery starting off or a full MRI of your organization, you got to do something.
I think I would just add that from our business perspective as on the product side, we always say that one of our biggest competitors is the status quo for doing cryptography, and for your planning, one of your biggest risks is the status quo. So as a motivator for like a call to action, as an example, for a lot of folks, somewhere in your organization is some poor soul who has been tasked with rooting out SHA-1 and replacing it with SHA-2 and more secure hash functions. If that hasn't bubbled up to your perspective yet, like, go find that person and talk to them, and then multiply that effort by 10, by 100, by 1,000 to get a feel for the magnitude of this effort that we're staring down. Because I think that's going to give you a feel for it. Or alternatively, instead of talking to the person who's fixed it all, go and see how many years you've signed off on exceptions to policy for keeping SHA-1 in your infrastructure.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that got deprecated in 2006 or so.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're still seeing it. So just keep that in mind as a call to action for the bigger challenges ahead.
So all of this, I think, is leading to, it's a tough balancing act, right? And certainly when I started looking at this 5 years ago, we were very cautious not to be alarmist, say the sky's falling, because if you're wrong there, then you don't get a second chance, right? We're talking to very senior people about multi-year projects that they would initiate. You got to be careful what you're saying. Yeah. At the same time, just to underscore some of the concepts that you all were talking about, the ability to crack asymmetric cryptography will threaten the entire bedrock of security that we have for everything online, right? Sure. All of the mutual authentication between devices, people and devices, and people, it's all predicated on asymmetric cryptography, right? So if that happens, the impact is known to be immense, obviously. One of the things that we have been thinking about, and we haven't yet put anything down on paper, but so there's a cost to take the action, right? To start doing discovery, build out a strategy, build out a roadmap, and then you can start to integrate into known enterprise transformation projects, or you can let something become obsolete. Like, there's a path forward there, we feel. But on the converse, I think there's probably in the next 2 or 3 years going to be a cost if you don't implement. In other words, if you're not early enough to this, I think you alluded to it, Rishu, that take financial industry, if half the financial industry has upgraded to the new algorithms and the other half hasn't, who's going to trust each other? Do we start to get into bi-level trust or no trust? So I think that is going to be a tipping point where there's a financial benefit in flipping over, right? That inflection point. Any thoughts about that in general, about the timelines there?
Right. Well, you've hit on a really important point. I mean, the presumption is that an enterprise is going to do what it takes to protect itself. But in reality, that's a very small part of what it's going to take. The world is incredibly interconnected now. And so your trading partnership, your ecosystem, if you want to call it, has also got to become secure. And that's really one of the largest challenges we face. It's not what an individual entity does, but how is it working in concert with the entire obligation that it has out in the digital world. The weakest link of the chain theory, right?
Right.
I think that's probably the largest impediment to real success there. And that's really never been undertaken before, right? Yeah. So that's really if there's an area to worry about, it's that coordination, I think.
I would also add that, like, in addition to thinking about the hard math and the cryptography itself that's being migrated and modernized in enterprise, it's a supply chain problem.
Right.
It's a policy problem to say, what are the expectations that my organization has on my suppliers and on my partners? So, what is the line at which that I'm going to have to stop communicating or stop trusting partners that I normally rely on for business functions?
Right.
All of this, even kind of wargaming about what happens if some of my major suppliers or partners don't migrate or don't adopt at the same timeline that I expect or my customers expect of them. That needs to be part of your overall cryptographic modernization strategy.
Yeah, remediation looks different across the board.
Yep.
So remediation at a provider partner level is going to look like policies in place, RFPs, RFQs in place, where you're mandating by a certain timeline, all of your partners have either adopted or migrated to stronger ciphers and have deprecated the weaker. That's a partnership level trust and remediation. You're then looking at remediation that can be done for sessions that are still leveraging these deprecated ciphers despite the first level of action, which is then you will have to choose to block a certain session, block a certain service, or even an endpoint to get to your own policies in place, which is a secure infrastructure, whatever you define as your post-quantum secure or your policy-based secure infrastructure. That's the second kind of remediation. The third kind you're looking at is your own IT admin is going to be tasked with securing all your employee endpoints, all your IoT endpoints, and bringing them to a strong key generation, not just from a cipher standpoint, but of course from a random number generator standpoint, from securing the keys on an HSM itself, and so on and so forth, right? So you're looking at different levels of remediation within an organization, and it's not just from, it doesn't apply to one particular vertical, it's across the board. Everyone will be doing this across different varieties of remediation.
Yeah, and I think Blair, you started to expand upon, trying to break it down a little bit. One of the things, and candidly, we made these numbers up. I put them out there and said we think around 60 to 65% of remediation is going to be done by the hyperscalers, but there's still a shared responsibility, right? 25 to 30%, if I can do the math correct. Dedicated security providers, yourselves in terms of HSMs, PKI and the like. Right. And then the remaining 10 to 15 is more bespoke use of applications making cryptographic calls. So there's different ways to remediate. That's one approach we've looked at in terms of breaking it down into something a bit more manageable. Do you have other thoughts around how to make it a little bit more digestible in the shorter term?
That's the right word. Bang on, digestible, reasonable, pragmatic. We don't have endless resources, time, money. Where do you start? So this has been undertaken by a lot of companies that have, really taken a terrific approach. And there's a lot of companies that are showing the way that it is not insurmountable. And I think you're absolutely spot on that it isn't everything all the time, all at once. It's broken down into reasonable chunks that with timing, if it's done right and it's done pragmatically, to your point, the vendor community is going to bring half of it to the table. That's reasonable. You have to expect that. You have to set, we are all held to a higher level, all three companies here. And it's like a fiduciary responsibility that we have to do that. But it's also working in this community, and I kind of, for a living, I'm in the ecosystem with John and Kuchu, we know all this. Mm-hmm. We have to work together. And that's also coming together better than I've ever imagined over the last few years. So much so that over the last 2 years, we can probably say, even here at RSA, PQC is sneaking into the conversations more than ever for a good reason, because those that know you've got, there's no more time to be messing around. Let's get people into a room, get the interoperability done. And so I'm thinking, I'm an optimist. I think that we are on the cusp of some fantastic progress over the course of the next year and a half. I'm hoping we have enough. I hope we have 10 years to prepare for this. Let's be all honest. Mm-hmm. But if we don't, I think if we take it under the assumption that within 5 years is when this thing might come to a head, I'm optimistic that we are doing the right things as the community. We can do better, but I think we're doing some of the right things now.
I wanted to put to the panel before we get to that. We are finding, certainly I'm finding these days that taking the word quantum out of this discussion is somewhat helpful because it's such a nebulous topic. It gets ambiguity around timeline. instead saying that there is this future threat on asymmetric cryptography, and these are the steps that you should take. And we've gone the step of actually publishing a draft profile for the NIST cybersecurity framework, just to try and put it more on commonplace activities that should be done from a quote-unquote cyber hygiene perspective. Any thoughts on that at all? That direction, not what we've done specifically, but that direction.
I mean, I think when we think about the potential threat, where it's most likely to manifest itself, what would a bad actor really want to accomplish? I think it boils down to just really making sure your PKI infrastructure is refurbished first and foremost. I mean, I know a lot is made of harvest now, decrypt later. When you take a step back and really think about what a bad actor will do broadly, it's probably more political disruption and chaos than actually trying to, mine vast reams of data looking for, the needle in the stack of the needle. So I think you best practice-wise, as you were alluding to, would be to look, very carefully at that infrastructure and make sure that that's robust and solid going forward.
Yeah, I think to add to what John was saying, most bad actors are going to go after a very targeted approach to a specific business to put them at threat.
Correct.
To either take them down to bankruptcy or either put them at class action lawsuit scenarios. So it comes down to cybersecurity hygiene, which is where crypto hygiene practices in place is going to be the minimum requirement. But I also, at the same time, and probably harping too much on this, but I still think the quantum threat is probably where this conversation is elevating to the board level. So we've had this conversation over the past 5 to 7 years as Palo Alto Networks across our customers. We've had different integrations, solutions in place. That's where HSMs play a big role, et cetera. But we still notice that the adoption is very specific to compliance, like customers who are supposed to be compliant for a certain FIPS standard, for a certain SEC standard, NIST standard, et cetera, the ones who really take that additional step to secure their keys, to secure their cryptography, have a good practice or policy in place. But now there's a reasonable doubt at the board level to say, okay, I have no visibility into existing cryptographic threats, let alone quantum threat. Can we start there?
Right.
Can we put a KPI on that? Can you give me a cost budget analysis on that? So cryptographic hygiene practices that are being put in place right now is being elevated to the board due to this impending threat and due to CNSA timelines that are 5 years. I think that rush itself is leading to these conversations and budgeting and cost allocation around that. So that's what we see.
And Lucas, from a SandboxAQ perspective, are you seeing particular industries that are more active than others?
I think it starts right now with the industries that are most impacted by regulatory standards, of course, on the federal side. So all of the folks that need to be leading the way in order to get ahead of this, particularly financial services on the federal side, and it aligns also with the world's largest and most complex IT infrastructures as well. They know they have to get an early start because they know how big of an effort this is gonna take, and ultimately it's industries that everyone relies on trust, but some industries really their bread and butter is trust, and I think that's an important part of, there's a whole ton of people who have a whole bunch of different views on quantum computing and how far away it is and how realistic it is. But it's important to keep in mind that cryptography, the purpose of cryptography in the business context is to build trust between you internally, with your customers, with your partners. And it doesn't matter if a quantum computer has 5 million qubits or if it can break RSA. What matters is once trust is broken, or once that kind of seed of doubt is there, that's when the real business impact starts. And for some folks, they're more directly impacted by specific regulations. For some folks, it's getting ahead of that trust issue. But early, from Sandbox's perspective, what we've seen is the companies that are really impacted by regulatory issues and need to get an early start are the folks leaning in right.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, based on some of the comments, that seed of doubt there is likely to be a couple of years before a cryptographically relevant quantum computer does exist. It's not going to be advertised on a billboard that someone has one, likely, if it's a nation state especially. So that doubt will come in sooner. Well, thank you all for coming to this wonderful establishment to talk about it here. We're certainly very happy and proud of what the Deloitte Cyber House here. So thanks again for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And thank you, audience, for listening in. Really. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.